Welcome to my World History Notes, where I read from the book I wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. You can find it on lulu.com, amazon.com, or the Bible Baptist bookstore, or just follow me here. We're going to discuss China today, BC. So bear with me, some important things to consider, to think about. You won't agree with my conclusions, maybe, or any of my conclusions or all of them, but you should know about these people and events, things I discuss. So let's talk about it. I'm going to read from the Bible first, a couple of verses. Acts 17:26. And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed in the bounds of their habitations. Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. That's and then Acts 10:34 and 35. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, of a truth I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him. Now, briefly, let us look at the feudal age of China. The period is said to have lasted from 770 BC to 255 BC, according to Durant's work, Our Oriental Heritage, from his series, The Story of Civilization. During this time, we have several persons of importance to note. The first one is named Quan Chung, the Prime Minister of Xi. He was the organizing genius of this most important of the original 55 provinces of China, consisting of a type of city state as in Canaan and Greece. And remember now, people are moving out from Babel and they're establishing civilizations and cultures around the world when there's enough of them to do that. Um, with a walled town and farmland, these city states in like Canaan and Greece, a walled town and farmland and small walled villages or suburbs, as recorded in the Bible, surrounding it. Kwang Chung, or simply Kwang, replaced bronze tools with iron and established a government monopoly or control of iron and salt. He taxed money, fish, and salt. As the advisor to Duke Yuan, not the political leader himself, but much like Joseph, the second in command, he made his little country a well-ordered state, which became the basis for Chinese government. He was applauded later by Confucius for giving order to the state. He served from 683 BC to 640 BC. There was a great struggle in China between those who believed that the proper order of society was best served by following local customs and practices thought to have come from above, and those who wanted the state to codify laws issued by the state. The legal codes, which were usually beneficial to the aristocracy, came into being in the duchies or provinces of Cheng or Qin and Qin about 535 BC and 512 BC, respectively. Custom and law found a compromise, and this resulted in the Chu Li, the law of Chu, set for 2,000 years the Chinese government with an emperor ruling as the vicar and, quote, son of heaven. And as Durant says, holding power through the, I'm quoting, holding power through the possession of virtue and piety, and aristocracy, partly of birth and partly of training, administering the offices of state, a people dutifully tilling the soil, living in patriarchal, father or elder brother governed families, enjoying civil rights, but having no voice in public affairs. Excuse me. And a cabinet of 6 ministries controlling respectively the life and activities of the emperor, the welfare and early marriage of the people, the ceremonies and divinations of religion, the preparation and prosecution of law, the administration of justice, and the organization of public works, unquote. You will note that in China, as well as elsewhere, the union of church and state, of religion and government, is complete from the start, and there is little discussion of freedom of conscience, freedom of association, or freedom of religion. From about 604 BC to 517 BC, we have Lao Tzu. The dates, of course, are questionable, but widely accepted as being reasonably accurate. He ran the Royal Library of Chu, according to historian Suma Chen, and disgusted with politicians, was determined to go live in seclusion. When requested, since he was going into requirement to write a book, he consented to write a book in two parts, one called Tao and one called Te. Lao Tzu was his title, the Old Master, and it is said that his real name was Li, meaning the plum, Li. The book is now known as the Tao Te Ching, or the Book of the Way and of Virtue. It is the primary book of the religion known as Taoism. In Taoism, almost follow the path of nature. The Tao, like Einstein's God, is an impersonal force that operates the universe. Like Allah, it doesn't love its adherents, and like Brahma, it is unknowable. In fact, in Taoism, knowledge is not virtue. In fact, it is a problem, for it leads to trouble and sorrow. But King Solomon already had that figured out hundreds of years before the Tao Te Ching, which many scholars say was not written by Lao Tzu, but was written before he was born. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 1:18, "For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth the knowledge increases sorrow." Lao Tzu believed, among other things, that the worst possible leader of a state would be a philosopher. From about 551 to 478 BC, we have Confucius or Confucius, say Kung Fu Tse, meaning Kung the master. Born in Shantung province, he was China's most famous philosopher. His work remains today in the Analects of Confucius. He, like all other deluded and deceived leaders of philosophy and religion, denied the Bible's one path to God without ever having seen a Bible, perhaps. A famous statement of his was, and I'm quoting, "All the rivers of righteousness flow into the lake of heaven." He would fit rightly in today with today's universal religionists. According to legend, Confucius began his career as a teacher at age 22, teaching out of his home, charging whatever modest fee his pupils could pay. Like the ancient Greeks, the Chinese were always looking to learn something new. Acts 17:21. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else, but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Like the Greek philosopher Socrates, whom I didn't mention in our class on Greece yet, he taught by asking questions. Socrates wrote nothing down, and we're dependent upon his student Plato for most of our information on him. Both Confucius and Socrates taught in this fashion, asking pointed questions of their students, supposedly to lead them closer to the truth. Socrates was finally condemned by an Athenian court and sentenced to drink poison for his disturbances. Confucius, on the other hand, went on to hold several offices for the Duke of Lu, and legend has it that he was so wise that when he was Minister of Public Works, everything went smoothly. And when he was Minister of Crime, crime disappeared. Resigning his position eventually over his disapproval of his employer's worldliness and lack of virtue, he wandered homeless for many years with a few faithful disciples. He wrote on many topics regarding everything from good government to the proper family life and set the example for Chinese philosophy in ideal government as well as personal virtue and home life for over 2,000 years. Confucius also left behind 5 books known as the Five Qing by the Chinese. To this, they added 4 books or shu of the philosophers, and this became known as the Nine Classics. Confucius was an agnostic, a term coined by Thomas Huxley, Charles Darwin's biggest supporter. Basically, it means that a person doesn't profess to believe in God or not to believe in God, as he simply doesn't know. I would say to you that an agnostic is an atheist who is too afraid to admit it, just in case God is listening. Confucius' greatest passion was for morality, not religion. The period of time between 403 BC to 221 BC is known as the period of contending states in China, a time of chaos, disorganization, and much war. The man who unified China was known as Shi Huangti or Qin Shi Huangti from the dynasty Qin, from which we get the name for the country. He was the illegitimate son of the Queen of Qin and a minister named Lu. Shi forced his father to commit suicide and persecuted his mother, assuming the throne at the age of 12. According to the historian Sima Qian, when he was 25, he began to conquer the petty states into which China was divided. In 230 BC, he conquered Han, Han, in 228 BC, Chao, in 225 Wei, in 223 Chu, in 222 Yan, then the most important state of Qi in 221 BC. China was finally under one rule. He then pieced together many walls on the northern frontier designed to protect China from barbarian attack, thus creating the 1,500-mile long Great Wall. This is the largest structure ever built by mankind. Although this wall did not keep out barbarians, it did slow them down. Durant says that it slowed the Hun attack down so much that they chose to attack to the west. And he goes on to say that Rome fell because China built a wall. An 8th century Arab chronicle is reported to have called the wall the ramparts of Magog. Remember that when you read Ezekiel and Revelation about the end times. He moved China away from rule by custom to rule strictly by law and a strong central government. He destroyed the power of local warlords or feudal barons and replaced them with a nobility of civil servants placed in each province. He, in other words, gave an order and a structure to Chinese government and therefore society that it had not had. He was, however, the enemy of scholars and particularly hated Confucian scholars, ordering all copies of Confucius' books burnt. The scholars saw that under one supreme government, They would not have the freedom of thought and liberty of conscience that they had when things were more disordered. It is an historical fact that as power is concentrated into the hands of a very few, and then perhaps one, individual freedom is set aside. The emperor burnt many books of philosophy and consigned those who hid those books to forced labor on the Great Wall, where most died. Shi Huangti spent his final years paranoid in trying to find an elixir for immortality. He was buried in a tomb with several hundred young girls who were buried alive to keep him company in eternity, behind hidden traps to kill intruders, and even the workmen were killed to keep the secrets of his tomb from the world. Chaos again reigned at his death. The Han dynasty followed after Wen Ti restored order. He permitted freedom of speech, excuse me, and writing once again. Also, he permitted criticism of the government, which had been outlawed by the previous emperor. The Han ruled China for 400 years, and the Chinese who claim to trace their roots to this dynasty are proud to call themselves Han Chinese today to separate themselves from what they consider to be inferior Chinese. The greatest of the Han emperors was Wu Ti, who reigned over half a century from 140 BC to 87 BC. He successfully fought barbarians and made China master over Korea, Manchuria, Annam, a kingdom in central Vietnam, Indochina, loosely defined the area of current Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and Turkestan in Central Asia. Wu Ti would be considered today a socialist as he established national ownership of China's natural resources to prevent private monopolies and wealth gain from manipulation of these resources by private individuals. Even the production and sale of alcoholic beverages was a state-run industry. He nationalized export and trade and tried to stabilize the way prices were established. The system flourished for a time, and trade grew as he ruled from his capital at Luoyang. Scholarship and poetry abounded, and poetry was beautiful. Pottery was beautiful, excuse me, not poetry. Pottery was beautiful, Suma Chen tells us through Will Durant. The Imperial Library had nearly 10,000 books, and no one came to public office without passing the national examinations, which were open to all. China had never been so prosperous. Natural disasters such as great floods and droughts ruined his price fixing scheme, making food and clothing in such short supply that prices skyrocketed. Businessmen complained that state control had destroyed competition and incentives to produce anything for sale. After the death of the emperor, court intrigue, corruption, and exploitation of the mass of people by unethical businessmen and politicians became the norm until a new reformer arose named Wang Mang in 5 AD. Very important. We're going to talk about Japan at the time next, and we'll stop there and then we'll go on. I appreciate you watching this. I hope it encourages you to do some digging. Take care.